Hey, Victory, we want to thank you for joining us here today. We're so excited to be able to gather here online with all of you. We're in week 5 of...
This is Kids and Students Takeover, and here's what's actually going to happen today. We are currently in week 5 of our series, Hope Healers. Today's service may look slightly different than what you might be used to seeing, but we can assure you we have a lot of fun and special service elements that your entire family will enjoy. So as others continue to join us, let's quickly go over what today's service will look like. Here in just a few moments, our Victory kids and students will lead us in a time of worship. Then we're going to celebrate our graduating high school and college seniors. After that, you'll have a chance to partner with us and what God is doing here at Victory and in our community through online giving. You'll hear a relevant message from Zach and I that we hope brings you encouragement no matter where you are today. Then we'll respond to the message with one more song, and we'll have a few of our Victory kids lead us in communion together. If you haven't prepared that ahead of time, please be sure to do that now. Finally, we'll wrap up with an invitation to next steps. Now, if you're joining us, we want to know you're here, so we ask that you would please check in. We will be posting a link down in the chat for you to do so, or if your phone is available and you have the Victory app, you can check in on there as well. The Victory app is free, by the way. If you're watching on your phone, don't worry, you'll be able to do that after service as well. If you're a kid or student joining us today, give us a shout out in the comments. If you're a first-time guest with us today, welcome and thank you for joining us. We are absolutely honored that you're here with us today for the first time, and we're praying that God uses today's service to get you connected. A link to our connection card will also be posted in the chat. Please fill that out and we'll get back with you as soon as possible. No matter what platform you're watching on right now, we want to encourage you to engage in the chat with us and with others who are watching with you. You can talk about what's happening, react to a point from the message, discuss what you might be learning, and ask questions like how I got this great hair. We also have some hosts and Next Step volunteers in the chat that are ready to answer any questions you may have about Victory to help you find your next step or to pray for you at any point during today's service. Oh, and one last thing. Before we start our service, we encourage you to download the Victory app if you haven't yet to make your experience with us today even better. You can find our message notes, online giving resources, and so much more on the Victory app. Thanks for joining us today, Victory. We're glad you're here. Now let's get ready for Kids and Students Takeover.
Hey, it's the whole crafts. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us and tuning in with us. We're happy to be joining you in your living rooms as we begin this time of worship with our student band. Would you join us as we begin this time of worship? I'll raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies. I'll raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. I'll Hey, our signs came in.
Oh, sweet. You ready to go do this?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Well, you know, since the schools can't celebrate graduation this year the same as usual, it kind of felt like the right thing to do. Just go and, represent and help them feel special about this occasion.
We're in quarantine. Put on your disguise. No matter where you go, just because you graduated, I will find you. And I will put signs in your lawn. Yeah, I'm tired of these high school kids thinking that they can come in and volunteer in the nursery, and then just because they've completed 12 years of education, they can leave and live their own lives, not volunteer anymore. So I will punish them by defacing their lawns with signs of congratulations. Take that. We will put signs in every yard and assert our dominance, or so help me, we will burn Utica to the ground.
Enough with the burning things already. Let's go.
Let's do this.
Hang on, my seatbelt's starting to roll.
That's not an excuse. No excuses.
Safety first. Here's to hoping that all the addresses in our database are correct.
That'd be super embarrassing. Hurry up! EJ! EJ! I'm gonna honk. Don't put me on camera. I'm using my phone while I'm driving.
This next house, some seniors live here.
Seniors?
Well, a senior to senior grandparents. Yeah, Rick did not see that one coming. So, what if people don't actually want these signs in their yard, and we're actually just like trashing their yard?
Hadn't thought about that. Did you break it? It broke. What an amateur.
Shh! Free country!
This car gets so mad when you're not buckled. It's unlocked. Stupid car. Oh no, it's the attack dog. Good boy.
Quick,
did that look
drive.
like an action star?
Drive!
I can't, the parking brake. See you later, suckers!
Just spreading some encouragement.
Happy graduation! Happy graduation!
Found our next one. Think anybody's home?
Got a grad sign, but we'll give her a better one.
Oh no, move it to the right.
Why? It's perfect.
Oh, I think I saw some movement. Hurry!
Oh no! Run! Call that a sign and dash. Happy graduation! Happy graduation! Hurry. Watch out for the attack, Chihuahua! I think you're good. Oh no, go!
I think the scariest part about that whole thing was just the dogs.
Spreading hope, now go!
Dude, it's saying your key is not detected.
What?
Did you,
Wait.
leave it at that house?
Oh no. There it is. Get my key. We're the worst vandals I've ever met. That is why you should always have your car keys surgically implanted into your arm. Should have known better.
Our seniorest senior of them all. Social distancing.
Yeah, I think we did it. I think we showed them who's boss. I bet they're so scared, they'll never graduate high school again.
So, that was fun. And, if we didn't get your yard and you have a grad and you want that sign, then we're gonna put these signs in the entryway to our office area, and you can stop by the church anytime this week and get them and put it in your yard.
What he said.
I think the church has positively impacted me by giving me opportunities that I never would have had with any other churches, such as Camp Allendale, CLI Believe, and Praise Team. It's given me opportunities to grow my faith in Christ and be closer to God. Thank you.
In my life, some of the ways church has affected me is really developing relationships that have helped me get through life, like really good lifelong friends and mentors, and also getting to go on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic and getting to learn a lot of new things and really see what the outside world is like. And another thing that's really cool is that we get to go on CIY and different trips like that that are really cool and fun. And I think that has just really helped me through my life. Church is just a thing that's always going to be there, that's really helpful and a good time. Thank you.
Hey Victory, my name is Kaylee and I've been a part of Victory Student Ministry for over 3 years. Victory Student Ministry has definitely changed me for the better. I came from a small church that we didn't really have a student program before, and Victory really got me into CIY and the fall retreats, and it's just changed me for the better. Thank you for all you do.
These are just some of the examples from a few of our students to say thank you and hopefully demonstrate the enormous impact, the eternal impact that you are able to have on the lives of the next generation because of the ministry that happens here at Victory Christian Church. None of that could be possible without your generosity, with your time, your finances, and your energy. So thank you so much for serving and for making a difference in our community and in our youth. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this week as we have Kids and Student Takeover. If you're anything like me, then you're probably sitting in your pajamas right now in your living room watching this. It's been one of my favorite things about quarantine is I actually get to participate in church with my family and do it in my pajamas. So it's the best thing ever. And so we kind of want to start with this week's message with a question. And as good preachers, we only ask questions that we know the answer to. And so the question is, have you ever been stuck? It's a terrible feeling. Being stuck is the absolute worst. I know you have, I have. I'm a mover. To be stuck is like the worst form of torture for me. And I'm also a bit of a control freak at times. So to be stuck is just that ever-present reminder and pulling me out of the illusion that I ever had control to begin with. And it reminds me that I'm actually completely out of control. And when you're on a journey, that's when being stuck is sometimes the worst thing because when you're stuck on the journey, it's like the worst nuisance that can happen. Getting stuck stops the journey.
I remember once when I got stuck on a journey, and it was horrible. I've had terrible luck with cars ever since I started driving. I have blown head gaskets, I've blown radiators, I've thrown engine rods, I have run out of oil. I've done basically everything cruel and unusual you can do to a car, and it's dished it right back at me. Hate cars. Well, this all began back in my freshman year of college. If you don't know, I went to college in Knoxville, Tennessee at Johnson University, and every weekend I drove 2.5 hours one way up to Kentucky to do ministry on the weekends. Well, on this particular weekend, I made it almost halfway, before my car came skidding and sputtering and smoking to a stop right at the peak of Jericho Mountain. If you haven't been that way before, Jericho is one of the bigger mountains that you have to cross on that line between Tennessee and Kentucky. So I was like halfway home and my car said, nope, no further, I'm going on strike. So I kind of freaked out. Realizing that I was closer to school than I was to home, I called my RA. I said, hey Jeff, I'm trapped. Can you send somebody to pick me up? And he said, yeah. Let me ask Ryan. He's sitting in his room. He's not doing anything. He's playing video games right now. He can come pick you up. And I heard him on the phone, and Ryan's like, yeah, I'll leave right now to get you. So I waited, and then I waited. And then I kept waiting. And over an hour later, with no sign of help, having to desperately relieve myself and having no signs of rescue anywhere, I called him and said, where's your man, Jeff? Where is Ryan? I'm going to die here. And I don't know if Ryan's video game was really engaging. I don't know if he just hated me or if he had the memory of a goldfish. But either way, Ryan was still on his couch. In the 3-second span of time between Jeff entering the room and leaving the room, he forgot to come pick me up. It was wonderful. How many of you have ever been in a situation like that where you were stuck? How many of you are feeling stuck right now in your current situation? It's a terrible feeling. It's like nothing else that I've ever really experienced, feeling that stuckness. And it may sound like semantics, but I think that there's a bit of a difference between being lost and being stuck. Because you see, when you're lost, there's kind of some implied hope there. When you're lost, there's usually some clear path to get you back home, even if you don't know where that path is. There's a chance that you'll wander around the woods until you just remember where you came from. You see a sign that reminds you of where you need to go. Maybe a plane will fly overhead and you'll be able to signal it and it'll stop to get you. Maybe your friends will come back for you. Maybe you'll follow a river to civilization. Maybe you'll lasso a bear and ride it back into town with your mullet flowing in the breeze. Being lost has at least a small amount of hope. But when you're stuck, that's a little bit different, because stuck means that there's something actively fighting to keep you where you are. There's an enemy when you're stuck that's holding you in place. Maybe it's mud that's holding your tires and you're stuck and you can't get out. Maybe you're locked in a room or locked outside of a building and that door stuck in your face is that enemy. Maybe there's a global pandemic that's stopping your daily life. Can anybody relate to that? Being stuck means there's an enemy and there's not a clear sign of hope. And that's why, at least to me, being stuck is a bit more serious of a situation. And it's something that eventually we're all going to face and we're all going to have to wrestle with. And the reality is, sometimes when you're stuck, you just can't get out on your own. There's no hope of getting out unless somebody comes to help.
Mm-hmm. And I know that we're all experiencing this kind of strange time in different ways. But for me, in a lot of ways, this whole pandemic, this quarantine feels very much like just constant state of stuckness. Yeah. Like in my mind, it's still March, right? Because we haven't really moved on from March, and it kind of baffles me that we're already halfway through May. It's kind of insane to me, really. But we're all experiencing it a little bit differently. Maybe there was an event or a milestone that was coming up that now you're going to have to miss because of everything that's going on. A lot of schools have, postponed graduation or decided to do the ceremony in a different way. It just doesn't quite maybe feel the same for you. Maybe you've had to push back your vacation that you've been waiting for. Maybe there's just the regular stuff that you were looking forward to that happened every summer that now we can't do. Maybe your wedding got pushed back. Maybe at work you've been furloughed, and so you're stuck not knowing whether or not you should go and find another job and make some income in the meantime, or if you should wait to see what happens to start going back to work at your real job. Maybe you still have your job, but you're forced to work from home and you feel unproductive with your kids and your spouse and your pets all there wanting attention from you. And so it just feels like maybe you're even more unproductive than ever, even though you still have your job. Maybe you're trying to eat healthier, but the other people in your house don't feel like changing their habits right now. So it makes you feel stuck, unable to get to where you're trying to go. Maybe even it's none of those things, but it's just a spiritual component that has nothing to do with quarantine necessarily. But maybe you're trying to grow spiritually and you're in an unbelieving family, and maybe your environment doesn't necessarily foster like a close relationship with Jesus. And so you feel this disconnect, and maybe you don't know your next steps or where to go. And so feeling stuck is just the reality of maybe where you feel like you are.
We're in a series called Hope Dealers right now. We're talking about how Jesus came to give hope to everyone around him. And we're kind of exploring this idea that Jesus didn't come to tell us we're wrong. He didn't come to burn down everything that came before him. He didn't come to chastise us and make us feel small. Jesus came to earth to show us hope and to teach us a better way to live life when we have that hope. Now, if you're in a stuck situation, hope is what you need. It's what you're looking for. It might even be why you tuned in online with us today, to look for some hope. Well, lucky for you, today we are continuing this series, Hope Dealers. We're going to be looking at the book of Mark, chapter 10, and we are going to talk about a story of a guy named Bartimaeus, or as we like to call him, Blind Bart. Now, at Victory, we like to remind people that people in the Bible aren't just storybook characters. They're not just pretend people that are made up to make us feel better or to teach us things. These are real people, and they went through real things. This man, Bart, was a real man who went through a real situation of stuckness just like we have. And I think you may find some things relatable about his account. Let's go ahead and read that together right now. This is from the book of Mark, chapter 10. Here's what it says. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When they heard that it was Jesus, son of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And so they called to the blind man. "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and he came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and he followed Jesus along the road. So there's a few things about this passage that we want to point out, that we want to kind of draw your attention to. And let's talk for a second about Bartimaeus' blindness. Most of the versions are not very specific about whether Bart was born blind or whether he became blind at an older date, but actually it's pretty safe to assume that he became blind, that he once had it. That's what the Net version does. What it says here is, "Rabbi, let me see again," implying there that he used to have sight. Now, the reason we say this is a pretty safe assumption for the Net version to say is that in almost every other story in the scriptures where a blind person is healed, if they were born blind, it's specified. Because that's a huge deal, right? To be somebody who's never been able to see before, now being healed, it's a big deal. In this passage, it doesn't say that. So the Net version adds this word, "let me see again," but that's a very safe assumption to make. So clearly, Bart knew what his life would be like, and now knows what his life is like. He has a very real understanding of this stuckness because he's seen the freedom of hope. That's what quarantine feels a lot like right now to me, because obviously we know what it's like to not be in quarantine. This is still a pretty new thing. Maybe if you have young kids, they don't really know and connect that life is all that much different. But for those of us who are older, we know, right? Maybe you had strong friend groups, or you were part of a small group here at Victory, and now you can't meet anymore. Maybe you're forced to work from home. You know what it's like to be out, but you can't go to your favorite places, and that's terrible. Bartimaeus felt this because he knew what it was like to have sight. Now, believe it or not, in Roman times, being blind wasn't actually quite as terrible as you might think it would be if you were a good enough manipulator. If you were a Roman, it would be pretty easy for you to say, "I made a deal with a god, and he took away my blindness to give me the gift of prophecy." And sometimes people would go along with it. Or if you were in the gladiatorial arena, a lot of guys who had lost an eye, even some who hadn't, would wear eye patches as a sign of intimidation to show, "Yeah, I've been in the arena, I survived, I made it out, fear me." But this wasn't Bart. If you notice in that passage, when it starts, he's already begging, and he knows that he's going to spend the rest of his life either as a slave or as a beggar. It's not much of an existence.
The next thing to take note of is that he calls Jesus out by Son of David. Now, this is such a small detail. If you're not paying attention, you'll miss it, you'll gloss over it, but this is actually really important because it gives us a lot of really direct insight into the kind of person this guy was. He was a well-learned Jew. He probably paid real close attention in Sunday school growing up, and he knew enough to know that this was a direct prophecy to the Messiah, that he would be a son of David. And even though that this guy was obviously a guy who had some kind of faith and pretty decent knowledge of the Jewish scriptures, that wasn't enough to save him from getting into this stuck situation. And, you know, the churchy answer that maybe you've heard other people say, or you've heard this implied, is that if you're a good religious person and you do what you're supposed to do, then that'll save you from a lot of heartache and the hurt that can happen in life. And that's partly true, but as we see here and as life experience will teach many of us, that's just not always the case. You know, doing all the right things and being a good person, having good faith doesn't necessarily spare you from pain and suffering. The second thing to note is that Bart's environment was one where he was, because of his ailment and because of his Jewish lineage most likely, people would have assumed that it was because of some sin that made him blind. And so he would have been ostracized socially. He would have been socially distanced, at least publicly, from his friends because they didn't want to take any of that shame on them. And so he was distanced from people, and also he was just stuck because when he tried to reach out to Jesus, the people around him were saying, "Hey, no, stop talking." They were trying to shut him up and keep him from getting closer to Jesus. Maybe you can relate to that. Maybe you've had coworkers who aren't believers and they've tried to discourage you in your faith or show you where it's, you know, irrational, or maybe you've lived in a family where not everybody believes, and so it makes it really difficult for you to have that hope. But as we kind of talked about earlier, it's a little bit different from being lost. When you're lost, there's some kind of hope to finding your way back in your journey. But when you're stuck on a journey, it almost seems impossible to know what to do or if there's anything to do. So, Evan, if we're going to go back to your story, being stuck up on the Jericho mountain, then you know, what did you do in that stuck situation?
So, being stuck there for a long chunk of time, didn't have a smartphone, didn't have, Nintendo Switch wasn't a thing yet. I didn't have the brains to put a good reading book in my car. So I did something that I actually hadn't done my entire freshman semester. I dug around in my backpack and found the one book that I had. It was a textbook assigned by my professor, and I actually read my textbook. It was kind of a turning point in my college education, right? My grades improved because of that stuck situation. But basically, I did something I never would have done if I had any other option and any other alternative. You know, our lives are so full of distractions. There are constantly things that stop us from doing what we know we should be doing. And that actually is a small benefit to being in a situation of stuckness. I wonder how many of you have noticed new things happening because of this quarantine. Like maybe you picked up a new hobby that you didn't know you would like cooking or gardening. You always assumed it wouldn't be for you, but now that there's nothing else to do, you've discovered that you actually like that hobby. Maybe you learned how to play a new board game. Or maybe you finally got around to reading that book or watching that show that you'd always wanted to, but never had time for. Did you decide to support a local business and then discover a new favorite place to eat? I know we did that as well. Maybe you, when you slowed down, you realized that you weren't being very intentional with your family time. Maybe you're working to change that. Maybe when you slowed down, you realized that you should have read those college textbooks before you got on a mountain and started failing out of college. Or maybe quarantine has allowed you to sit on your porch with a cup of coffee and actually read your Bible. I'll be the first to admit that even as a minister, it's hard to stay consistent in Bible study if you aren't extremely intentional. So maybe quarantine has actually been a blessing to your spiritual growth in that way.
And sometimes the implication of passages like this can imply that maybe there's only one side to this. There's only one way that this applies. Does this only apply to people who are doing something wrong, who maybe need the prompt of a stuck situation to be able to get back on track with maybe the things they need to be working on, kind of like Evan and his schoolwork back in college, right? But what if there's another side to that coin? Maybe you were doing what God's calling was for your life, and you were doing great things for the kingdom, but then this whole situation actually put a halt to a lot of the good things you were already doing. And so what about that situation? And I think, you know, part of Paul's story is a perfect reminder of this. Is what makes me think of Paul was a missionary, a high-performing evangelical machine. And in fact, most of us are here today because of Paul, because of his determination to go and spread the gospel throughout every corner of the earth and make sure people knew who Jesus was, the Son of the living God, God in the flesh. And he was constantly going on these mission trips, preaching, planting churches, and writing letters to the church leaders. You could not slow him down, and that is until he was stuck, shipwrecked on Malta. You know, we mentioned earlier, you know, that being a good Christian doesn't necessarily spare you from pain or suffering or stuck situations. It doesn't automatically, you know, keep you in the easy, comfortable life. And Paul is a perfect example of that. He was just doing God's work. He was doing everything he was supposed to be doing until he got arrested for doing what he was supposed to be doing, which was spreading the gospel. The Romans didn't like that very much. And the Jews also didn't like that. And so when he got arrested, he was getting transported from Jerusalem to Rome, which in his mind was also a blessing because that was the next part he wanted to take the gospel to. That's closer to the ends of the earth for him in that world. And so he was like, I'm getting closer to accomplishing my mission. And it kind of became a good thing until he got shipwrecked on Malta. He was on the sandbar with no escape in a harsh environment with a hot sun and venomous snakes and surrounded by people who were trying to worship him because he got bit by a snake and didn't die. And so they thought that meant he was God, but really he had to explain that was just because God was using him to bring them the gospel. And so while Paul was doing exactly what God wanted him to, God still said, hey, you know, I have better foresight than you. I can see the bigger picture. And actually, if I don't stick you in this situation, then there's a group of people that may never hear me. And so Paul was able to use that stuck situation to bring a whole civilization the gospel in a way that they probably wouldn't have otherwise. And that's just a reminder to me that no matter what side of the coin you're on when you're stuck, whether you needed it to get you back on track, or maybe God needed you to focus on something else, even if you were already doing something good. When we're stuck, it's a part of our journey that God is always actively using.
So what about Bart? We talked about a different example with Paul, but what about the story that we opened with? What about Bartimaeus? Well, Bart, because of his stuckness, ended up actually playing a huge role in revealing who Christ is when he said that phrase, Son of David. Here's why. When we analyze the historical accuracy of anything, of claims made about people, of historical books, biblical books, whatever, we look for people who can affirm. We look for multiple people who can validate. Having one single person who says one thing about something doesn't mean a lot, because one person can lie. But the odds of a lot of people telling a lie is a lot smaller. So when Bart says Son of David, even though it's only a couple of words, that phrase plays a big part in validating that Jesus is who he says he is, and he does what he says he can do. Those couple of words actually bear huge significance, because here's a man who this was not divinely revealed to him. He simply knew his scripture and knew what to look for. And Bart wouldn't have had that revelation if he wouldn't have been stuck.
And if you look at Bartimaeus' situation, his blindness forced him to look for Jesus in ways that he probably wouldn't have otherwise. And after he could see again, he was able to look back on that time and point in his life and point exactly to where God moved in his life. So my first question for you is when this pandemic is over and when life begins to go back to a sense of normalcy, if there is going to be one, are you going to be able to look back and point out where God moved in your life during this time? And if not, maybe that's something to consider. If Jesus hadn't done a work in Bartimaeus because of his faith, then he would still be blind. Bartimaeus had to reach out and in faith to Jesus. So my follow-up question for you is, what would be different in your life and in your situation if you didn't have the faith that you have? If you didn't have faith that Jesus is in control? Because like I said, Bartimaeus, he'd still be blind. He still wouldn't have a way to provide for himself or a family if he had one. He'd be socially distanced from everybody because of the shame associated with his ailment. So there was a lot on the line for him, but what's on the line for you? How would not having faith in this moment change your perspective, your attitude, your peace? If you can't identify what that might be, and what might be different in your life, then maybe that's another indication that you should pay a little bit closer attention to where in your life God might be trying to speak to you. But here's the ultimate truth and the reality that we want to get to you this week is being stuck is never your reality. It's only your mindset. There's no such thing as actually being stuck. Every season in your life is a key part of your journey. And if you are a Jesus follower, there's no such thing as being truly stuck, only called. So what is God calling to you in this moment of your journey? We tend to be impatient, look to the bottom line, the end goal, the final destination. But what's more important than where you're going is the journey to get there. Bartimaeus' journey taught him what he needed to know and what he needed to be looking for and to have faith, what he needed to have faith in because of his stuckness. So don't get caught up in the end game when God has you on a journey. Don't view it as being stuck. View it as the part of the journey that God has you on right now. At every point in our journeys and in our lives, we have a very clearly defined purpose to be hope dealers in a doped up world.
Well, as counterintuitive as this may seem, we think that maybe the best things to come out of this social distancing will actually be better relationships. I know that it sounds weird, but we think that this social distancing is requiring us to be very intentional about our relationships, which is actually going to improve them if we're being intentional about looking for opportunities. Look for things around you that you might not ordinarily see. For example, is your neighborhood more active right now? We were pretty tightly quarantined there for a bit, but now some of that is loosening up, and you may see that your streets are hopping a little bit more with kids and adults out running around. Maybe there's a neighbor next door who you've only ever said 3 words to before, but now he's eager to talk because he hasn't been able to talk to anybody but his kids for quite some time. Who knows? Maybe you'll be able to baptize him because you started a conversation in this season. Do you have more family time now? Well, spend some intentional time playing with each of your kids, or spend time with your spouse where you don't watch TV. Invest in some of those relationships because it will make your day-to-day life better. It just will. Having better relationships at home makes your life better, and it also positions you to be a better spiritual leader in your home. Or do you actually have less time now because maybe some of you have more free time and maybe others of you are super bogged down with stuff right now because you're stuck at home, but you're working longer hours than ever before and having to work in new creative ways to keep things going? Well, here's the reality. Your coworkers probably feel the exact same way that you do. So this is a great opportunity to show love to some other stressed people that you're close to. It'll be hard if you're busy, but try to carve out some little intentional times to reach out to your coworkers and let them know that you care about them. Maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a text, maybe it's a card, whatever it may be. Try to intentionally reach out to them in some kind of small way to let them know that you care about them as more than just an acquaintance that you have at work.
And it's amazing the positive things that even this strange time has been able to bring about for people. This is what some of you are saying on Facebook. David says, we have more time spent with family. We've had more arguments for sure, but have learned more about one another than ever before. A better understanding of one another equals more respect for one another. Without COVID-19, I don't believe we'd appreciate each other as much as we do now. Thank you for sharing that and your honesty in that situation. Courtney says, more time to play with my little one. Lots of decluttering, organization in the house, cooking healthier meals and baking. Kelly says more time with the family again, eating around the table more often, more than we ever did because we were so busy running kids everywhere. That's so important, so good. Brandy says, again, more family time, not having to rush from one practice to another. Family dinners at a reasonable time. Mike says lots of projects completed so that summer will be relaxing. Holly says it gave us time to get rid of the bags under our eyes from our very hectic schedules. And I can totally relate with that as well. As a church and as our own, students and kids ministries, we've tried to do the best that we can to create some unique opportunities to intentionally build relationships right now in the midst of quarantine and in the midst of this social distancing. Maybe that's a better way to put it since a lot of the quarantine regulations are slowly being lifted. But for our high school students, we're having weekly Zoom calls every Sunday night at 7. If you haven't been able to join those, I encourage you to jump on. We're doing it tonight. So be on the look on our Instagram and Facebook for the links and all that kind of stuff. Our 5th through 8th graders, we do online services just like we are right here. We do it right between the Sunday services. So from 10 to 10:30 each week, not this week because Student and Kids Takeover, but every other week. And we're meeting in the chat and we're having real conversations. People are hitting the prayer button and asking for prayer, and we're able to connect with small group leaders in that time. It's a very meaningful time, so make sure that you catch up with us there.
In the kids ministry, we're doing similar stuff. Every Wednesday at 6:30, we have preschool worship, and at 6:45, we have elementary worship with our small group leaders being super active in the chat, talking with your kids. Plus, we've got a bunch of unique social opportunities for your kids. We wrapped up a Lego challenge just a little bit ago, and we'll be doing more of those types of things coming up soon. We have a Minecraft group where your kids can get on and play video games with their friends. All sorts of stuff to try to intentionally keep relationships up and going. And you can find all that stuff on our social pages. Go to Facebook at Victory Kids Franklin for kids ministry stuff and at Victory CC Students for student ministry stuff.
When we're in a stuck situation, it's all we can see. We get a little bit of tunnel vision. We don't really have a whole lot of hope. When people ask us, how are you? All we can focus on is the negative. But when we finally get free of the stuck, we get that incredible breath of fresh air. If you're an optimist, you probably say things like, yeah, that was a hard season, but, and then you're able to talk about all the ways that you were able to grow from that experience and maybe the things that God was able to teach you in that. We all want to be able to do that and to be that type of person. Even the pessimists who are watching, maybe especially the pessimists. We want to look back and see how we grew, that it meant something, that the hardships, they were able to stimulate some kind of growth in our lives and change us for the better. What do you think Bartimaeus said to the people after he was healed? When Bart introduced himself, do you think he said, "Hi, I'm Bart. I used to be blind. Let me tell you about how awful it was." Or I think maybe he said, "Hi, I'm Bart. I used to be blind. Let me tell you about the man that healed me. He's incredible."
being stuck isn't a reality. Being stuck is a mindset. What will you tell people when you come out of your stuck? Will you tell people all about how horrible life was? Will you look back on 2020 and say that was just the worst season? Or will you choose to tell them about all the ways that God made you more intentional in your relationships? How God improved your life by giving you better relationships with the people that you cared about, all because of your intentionality. How He made you a better dad, a better mom, a better coworker, a better friend. When you come out of your stuck, how will you talk about this part of your journey? Let's pray together. Dear God, thank you so much for giving us stories like that of Bartimaeus, like that of Paul, and like the people that are sharing on Facebook. God, it's so encouraging to see that, yeah, we are going through a time that's pretty tough, but we're not doing it alone. God, inspire us in the moment to be intentional, to reach out to those people who are doing these things with us together and to intentionally build those relationships. As weird as it may seem, this social distancing is actually helping us be a little bit more social. We ask that you would bless those relationships and help us to grow your church in that way. We pray all of this today because of Christ's sacrifice. Amen.
My story isn't over, my story's just begun. Failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house, check your shame. You're in the Father.
In a moment, we will take communion. Communion is a special time that represents the last meal that Jesus ate with his friends before he died. When we take communion, we remember that Jesus died to take away our sins.
The little cracker represents Jesus' body, which was put on a cross. We don't have any tiny communion crackers at our house, so we're just using oyster crackers instead, but you can use whatever you have at your house.
The small cup of juice represents Jesus' blood. Here at Victory, we use grape juice, but at my house, we're using apple juice. You can use any drink you have.
As we take communion together, we invite you to say thanks to God for the grace that he offers. We also encourage you to say a prayer asking God to help your heart become more like his, a heart that forgives, just as we have been forgiven. When we're in a stuck situation, it feels hopeless. It feels hard to see beyond the stuck in our circumstances. But being stuck doesn't mean it's over. It means that God is at work. Just like Bartimaeus, when we trust that Jesus is who he says he is and can do what he says he can do, when we have faith, when we have hope, God helps us see beyond the stuck. And not just that, he uses that time that we're stuck to help us grow as we continue on the journey that he has for us, for the purpose that he called us to. We want to thank you all for tuning in with us today during this special Kids and Students Takeover. We really enjoyed it, and we hope you have too. If this message helped you in any way, please consider partnering with us financially to live out our vision of connecting people back to God. If you're on Facebook, please help us continue to reach others by sharing this video to your page or tagging someone's name in the comments. If you're watching on the website or the app, consider sharing the link with someone you know who needs to hear this message. And just a reminder that this service will be on demand in its entirety on Facebook, YouTube, and the Victory app, and of course on our website, victorycc.life/watch, immediately following the Sunday 10:30 service. If you need more information on what your next step might be, or any information about Victory, or just someone to pray for you, we have Next Steps volunteers in the chat right now ready to talk with you. Just reach out through a DM on Facebook or hit the live prayer button if you're watching in the app or our website. And finally, make sure to stay connected with us on our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, as well as our YouTube channel. We want to thank all the students, kids, and parents who helped make this service possible. We miss you guys. Please stay safe. Next week, Josh will be wrapping up.
See you next week for Hope Dealers.